Okay, thank you very much for coming this afternoon. Just out of interest, how many of you saw Vin Giang's keynote on Monday morning? You can see, actually I can almost not see you. I see a lot of people did. I think he has a very impressive title as magician, which he demonstrated. And I'm unfortunately just a chief technology officer, but a lot of my colleagues get very confused by that title, and I think they expect me to fix their phones or help them print stuff. And I know that when I do fix things for them, sometimes they think that's a bit magical. And I know we've got a science fiction theme this evening. And there's a great quote from Arthur C. Clarke for any sci-fi fans out there about any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So maybe that's as close as I'll get. Anyway, I'm going to talk today about the digital disruptors and how we can learn from them, and how hopefully I'll give you some initiatives or actions that you can take so you can go on your own digital transformation journey and become a disruptor yourselves. The first thing I'd like to touch on is why experience is so important. And I've seen a couple of presentations over the last 2 days touching on user or customer experience. And in fact, on Monday again, for any of you who saw the presentation from Dr. Stefan on the global megatrends, one of the last ones he finished on was around how humans are now becoming much more focused on experience than things. And that was actually driven home to me. It was my mum's birthday about 2 weeks ago. And when I contacted her to ask her what she'd like for her birthday, I'm very familiar that you don't buy things for people, and that can lead you into a lot of problems when you buy the wrong things. And she was very interested in an experience. They have this thing in the UK, picked up from my accent, called Red Letter Days, similar in Australia to the Red Balloon Organisation. So my mum's going to be doing some Formula One racing in a couple of weeks. Well, actually no, she's going out for dinner, but I did pick the right experience, hopefully. But why is experience so important? It's what drives the choices we make, whether in life or in business. It's how we determine what we're going to do. And it's very important, and it shapes our opinions. And I'd like to show you a quick example of a couple of good or possibly bad experiences.
Oh, finance app. I've been wanting to roll over my IRA.
Sure. I just need to collect your name, the place you live.
Yeah, that's a little...
Your social security number.
No, because we just met.
Your net worth.
Next.
Yeah, I'm a streaming app. You know, music, movies,
Yeah.
whatever you want, whenever you want it.
Great.
Yeah.
Drama.
Yeah, like chick flick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel you, totally.
Okay.
Actually, I can't stream anything right now.
You just said...
I know. That's a buffering issue. Just a minor bug. It's not... I just need time. If you just wait around until
done.
then... No,
next. Perfect. I know exactly what stock I want to buy.
English or Korean?
English.
Okay, Korean. Please give me your card info. Please wait. My back-end database has crashed.
It's Kate, right? Your friend Maggie said some great things about you.
Yeah.
You like cute heels, but you're more of a wedge girl than stilettos. You love comfort, but you're not willing to sacrifice style, and you're not into mules.
I hate them.
So what do you think of these?
It is like you know everything about me, but not in a creepy way.
Like you might get called later, so how about a cashmere wrap? Matches your eyes. That's 80% off. I've got jeans, tops, dresses, earrings, whatever you want. Just relax, and I'll take care of the rest.
So it's kind of a comical example, although I'm particularly familiar with the buffering issue. I don't know anyone who's adopting Netflix at the moment, but it seems like since Netflix came to Australia, the internet slowed down. So familiar problems, perhaps. The reason these things are so important is because the experience is what drives loyalty. A brand may get someone through the door, but it's not going to keep them. So that experience, which often these days is based and driven through technology or software, can either be a spectacular success or abject failure. So it's critical that your software, the technology supports that. So we're in this economy today, the app economy as we see it, and the models that you're probably familiar with are falling away. They're becoming obsolete. We're seeing new disruptors entering the market and changing the way a large number of sectors and industries operate. And the customers that are driving this demand and this change, they want three things. They want things to be fast, they'd like them to be reliable, and they expect security. And those are all table stakes, or they are things that people just expect. And if you fail on any of those measures, then you're creating a poor experience. You're disappointing your customers. And disintermediation is ubiquitous, which I think we just put in these slides to try and trip up the presenters. But what that basically means is you're continually seeing markets being disrupted. New players are entering and interfering with existing business models. To give you a financial example, 5 to 10 years ago, your bank or your credit card company knew a lot about your spending patterns, where you spent money, when you spent money. Today, they don't have access to that information. It's people like PayPal or Apple who have that insight. And as you're probably familiar with, information is power, so they can do a lot with that information. The banks, in this case, are losing out. So we're seeing, and you're probably very familiar with the term digital transformation, but there's an imperative around this. Organizations, regardless of sector or industry, have to go through this transformation. And we see there are a number of components to this. The first is around optimization. How do you ensure customer loyalty, but also grow that customer base? How do you get cost efficiencies? How do you improve the way you operate? And that certainly is something you need to level the playing field. The second pillar is around agility. How can you actually change to the new demands? How can you pivot and refocus where you're actually driving your organization, technology or otherwise? How can you prioritize based on a broad portfolio of choices or capabilities? And the third area reflects innovation. How do you introduce and create brand new business models, different channels to get to your customers or users? But what we're seeing is all organizations, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with these challenges and balancing these challenges, what will eventually happen is the ideation or the innovation aspect will be the primary competitive differentiator. That's how you're going to leapfrog your competitors if you're in a competitive market. So what's driving this? Well, what we see and what our research is demonstrating that it's your customers that are disrupting your business. And software is a fundamental capability that can help rewrite the way your business operates. So we actually recently completed some research, and we've started sharing this globally. And this was across 16 countries. It was across a wide range of industries and also a large number of different scaled organizations. And roughly around 600 of the respondents were from the Asia-Pac region, and around about 100 of those, or 6% or so, actually came from Australia. What we actually did with this research is we took the responses and we took a combination of factors in the questions and the interviews we completed and actually came out with, in effect, a tiering of those respondents. So we have the digital disruptors who are at the top of that stack. So they're leading the charge. They're taking advantage of digital technologies. They're taking advantage of focusing investment in the digital space. And most importantly, they're actually seeing significant returns from that investment. So it's changing the way their business operates. We also have the digital achievers, so they're kind of in the middle. So they've started that journey. Maybe they're not fully focused on it or not necessarily seeing the returns yet. And finally, we have what we're calling this year, positively perhaps, the mainstream, as opposed to the people lagging the rest. So they may still be on that journey, but they haven't seen the returns or they're not fully invested in it yet. One thing I wanted to highlight at a global scale, so these are the 16 countries we surveyed and those the digital effectiveness scale. And we've actually ranked those, and you'll notice that Australia actually comes fourth from the bottom here. Now, we do have higher levels of digital disruptors than some of the other countries surveyed, but I think what we're seeing reflected here is the actual investment in the digital space isn't as significant as other areas, or equally, we're not seeing the kind of returns that we anticipate. It's also a theme or a message that our new Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, highlighted in one of his first presentations, talking about the whole digital transformation that the country as a whole needs to go through. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the DTO, or Digital Transformation Office, that he established, and obviously is still being continued to invest in. So why is this so important? What are the benefits that these digital disruptors are achieving? Well, they're seeing significant growth in revenue, and that's 2 times what we're seeing from the mainstream respondents. They're also seeing even higher profit, and most importantly perhaps is a lot of that new revenue is being driven from those new digital initiatives. So they're actually seeing returns on the investments they're making. We also identified that they're more likely to have greater maturity in their adoption of Agile across the organization. They're more likely to have broader implementation of DevOps. So as a discipline, it's not just existing in pockets, it's becoming a center of excellence or a consistent practice. And also, as I've seen highlighted from Gartner in a number of sessions over the last couple of days, APIs are driving a lot of the backbone to their application development. So here we have the 10 lessons or characteristics or traits that we've identified based on common themes across those digital disruptors. I'm not going to go through all of these today, perhaps you'll be pleased to know, but I will highlight a couple that I think are of particular interest, and encourage you, if you'd like more information on this, the survey, or the report I should say, is on our stand, and we'd be more than happy to share this information with you. The first one I'm going to pick up on is understanding how important software and applications are to the business. So you see the example here where recognizing that organizations are becoming app or software centric is consistent in 3 times as many of the digital disruptors as the mainstream. At a similar level, recognizing for a lot of these organizations that at their core, they are software companies. We have a great example where our CEO met the CEO of Bank of America, and he made a comment that they're effectively a software company with a banking license. They have, as it happens, more developers than Microsoft. And similarly, if you look at another peer of theirs, JP Chase, they have more business analysts than Google. So a lot of these organizations recognize that software is at the core of how they differentiate themselves. Lesson number 2 focuses on that adoption of modern software deployment and delivery mechanisms, software development methods. The digital disruptors that we identified in our research were nearly 2.5 times more likely to have broad maturity in terms of how they leverage Agile and also how they've implemented DevOps. Not just in pockets, but actually seeing it delivered across their organization, so getting real benefits from those practices. The third lesson is around APIs. Now, it's explicitly focused here on internal use of APIs. And as you can see in the examples here, there's some different illustrations of how they're using those APIs. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with some of the Gartner messaging around bimodal IT, dealing with the challenge of your legacy solutions that maybe are moving at more of a traditional pace or a marathon, to use the analogy, where you've got the new modern mobile capabilities that need to move more agilely, need to be more like a sprinter. And obviously, you're all dealing with these challenges today. This isn't a new problem. APIs give you the potential to bridge those 2 areas. So actually connect your legacy solutions, take advantage of the power and the information that they maintain, and actually use the APIs to actually expose those through modern interfaces using modern communication mechanisms. And it's actually a theme that I've heard a number of times over the last couple of days around how APIs as a capability can support that approach. The final lesson I picked up on, just to be different, was lesson number 6. But it really ties back to the experience theme that I've heard shared over the last couple of days, and also recognizes that the adoption of new channels, new approaches, even new technologies is fundamental for these organizations to focus on to drive how they interact and communicate with their customers. And there's some examples of the kind of differences we're seeing between mainstream adoption and those digital disruptors in terms of how they're focusing on those new technologies. It's also of particular interest when I look at some of the research we've actually carried out during this event. So for any of you who've come to our stand over the last couple of days, we've actually been carrying out a survey as part of a competition, admittedly, where we're asking, if we look across those 10 traits, what you're finding out are the most important traits in your opinion. And we've actually had over 100 people during this event respond to this quiz. So we've got what you would call a statistically representative data set. And what was interesting for me is if I look at the top theme that's been voted on during the symposium, it's actually the 6th one I picked up on, that emphasis on digital channels. The next 3 are actually not themes that I've picked up on during the presentation, although the last one, which arguably given that we're at a technology event, you'd expect you ought to appreciate the importance of software and apps. But I think it also highlights, in terms of the attendance here, that we've probably got a lot of people who are perhaps further on that journey or certainly interested in progressing on that particular journey. I'd also say, if any of you haven't taken part in that survey, we'd like to share this information after this event, so please come to the stand and complete that survey and give us your own opinions on what you think are the most important traits. What we also recognize is, there's a lot of principles or characteristics that I'm trying to highlight here that you could take advantage of, and we'd like to share with you how you might do that. But you've probably got a number of other challenges that you're experiencing today. And obviously, balancing both the challenges and the opportunities could be challenging. And here's a quick example of the kind of experience you might be having.
Commence agility test sequence. Challenge, accelerated timelines. Challenge, non-scalable project tracking. Challenge, budget reallocation. Challenge, budget reallocation. Challenge, integrating disparate systems. Challenge, continuous software releases.
Now, I'm sure that's not familiar to most of you, and certainly I haven't seen anyone on a treadmill at the event. Actually, I haven't seen anyone on a treadmill at the event, but I haven't seen anyone going through those kind of challenges myself. But I'm sure that's familiar to you in terms of you need to both take advantage of those opportunities and also look at how you balance that with the kind of constraints you're operating under. What I'd like to do now is talk a little bit about how you might take that step forward and how you might continue that journey. So firstly, what we would recommend is you have to ask yourself some frank questions. If you're going to go about accelerating your transformation, there's some questions you need to ask. Taking a couple of examples here. How are you going to get new apps and services to your users, to market, faster? Once you've done that, how are you going to ensure that experience that I talked about at the beginning? How are you going to ensure that regardless of the channel that your users, whether they're internal or external, take, they're getting that experience that they now expect? If I break this down a little bit further, what are the capabilities that might back up how you're going to address some of these questions? So I've mapped some of these capabilities out here. The first I'll touch on is agile management. And really, a question you have to ask yourself, if you're going through this kind of transformation, are you doing this across your organization? Are you actually changing the way you operate to actually be more agile, to respond with appropriate agility? If I look in the DevOps area, which ironically I know from speaking to both customers and agencies locally can sometimes be considered a bit of leave a bad taste in the mouth. So I might look at some of the themes underneath DevOps. So if we looked at, for example, continuous delivery, when you're building software or apps, how do you take the friction out of that process? How do you make it as efficient as possible? And if we look at security, how are you balancing trust within your user community with the convenience of actually providing access and appropriate access to the systems and applications that those users need. So if we take the first, or one of the lessons I highlighted, which is around that adoption of new or modern design and development methods, if we look at Agile and DevOps, if you're going on that particular journey, how do you actually raise your maturity? How do you adopt, for example, things like the Scaled Agile framework? How do you shift your mindset so you're looking at not so much projects, but the products or the outcomes that you're going to deliver through those apps? And if we look at the actual software delivery itself, how do you refine the tools around that? How do you build a software factory and start looking at the releases of software more from the perspective of establishing a production line so you can build a cadence and iteration around getting more rapid releases to your end user community? If I focus further on the agility piece, the first level really of that journey or that maturity is very much around getting efficiencies at a team level and then starting to scale that up to the point where you can look at a portfolio of capabilities so you can grow that agile approach. You're also able to adapt or pivot based on the demand of your organization. And ultimately, that should be driven around the outcomes that the business wants, the value that they seek to drive. You also need to factor in an appropriate level of bandwidth or availability so you can look to the next horizons, not just what's happening in the next quarter, the next calendar year, but also looking beyond that and starting to do some investigation into new capabilities or new areas. So how you balance those challenges is the maturity journey you can go on in the Agile space. If I look at application delivery, typically in many of the environments we work with, it's very chaotic, it's a very complex environment. You can see highlighted at the top a number of challenges that organizations have to deal with. And in fact, many of the people I've spoken to at this event, have shared examples of challenges they're experiencing in these areas. You've got the different platforms or different levels of release you need to go through. It's not very efficient. There's lots of wasted time. There's lots of idle time. So one approach we might take for more of a continuous delivery model is if we look at the time frames that are highlighted here, you've got almost twice as much time that's idle, where we're just waiting for things to happen. So we can introduce capabilities to try and release and make that time use more effective. The first really is around parallel work streams. So what we're looking at there is recognizing that many of your developers may be significantly constrained. They don't have access to the back-end systems that they need to complete development or even testing. So by introducing those parallel work streams, we're shrinking both the wait and the work times. It's also around how we can pull through information or data so that testing activity is much more representative of what's happening in your production environments. The next level really is around putting some quality into that process, so automating some of the testing, ensuring that the testing happens earlier in the development cycle, which I'm sure you're all familiar, has a significant cost and obviously a quality impact. And again, you're seeing those time frames shrink. The third piece is really around automation. So it's actually taking out a lot of the human interaction. So we automate the different steps. We take out things like scripting from the process. So you can have a much more rapid release cycle. And typically, you're introducing less enhancements or features into those release cycles, so they tend to go much more smoothly. Ultimately, this can drive a better customer experience. It also means that whilst we're now moving into the production area, or even pre-production, we're actually able to do much better assessments of how those applications are going to be used and drive that feedback back into development, so actually make performance improvements or tuning approaches. Ultimately meaning the end-to-end software delivery cycle is much more highly automated and has much better associated quality. So we did this for ING. They're a global financial institution, probably in Australia, known more from a banking or insurance perspective. One of their key constraints was their release cycles were quite poor, And what they were seeing was their customer experience, as reflected in the star rating you'd see in the App Store, was not only poor, but equally they weren't able to factor in that customer feedback. So they're almost spiraling in terms of not being able to catch up. So through the adoption of that automation, their mobile banking experience, the quality improved. The release cycles, as you can see highlighted here, moved from months to days. And it basically engendered better quality, better response in what their customers were seeing in their app. So that was very fundamental to the switch they saw in that customer experience. The next piece I'd like to talk about is around APIs, which I highlighted as another lesson we saw in those digital disruptors. And it's certainly an area that can be the building blocks of your transformation. And there's a number of aspects to how APIs can help you. And I'm just going to share a couple of those. The first is around integration. It's very much tied to that point I made earlier around how you may address bimodal IT in terms of leveraging the power and the capabilities in your legacy solutions. So actually using it as an integration platform or a way of taking that information and sharing it in an appropriate fashion, both internally and externally, to tap into it. It's also about security. Providing the right access to the right people to that data, all those services, and also protecting it from the point of view of ensuring that you're not compromising the performance or the use of those legacy solutions. So giving the right people the right access. It certainly enables application development, and it can actually accelerate that. So by exposing services or data, you're enabling not only your internal developer community, but it's an opportunity to take those APIs, publish them through a portal, and allow third parties, partners, customers, suppliers to tap into those APIs and build their own applications off the back of them, which leads into how you may unlock some of the value for that data. Whether that's just exposing it externally and letting other people use it, or whether that's actually monetizing that data and driving revenue streams. There's some great examples locally where banks are using this to white box capabilities around the financial services they provide. It's a big theme as we see deregulation around who's allowed to provide banking services. So here's an example from Ice Mobile. They run a loyalty program, and a lot of their customers have their own back-end systems, and they need to tap into that information, and they want to change their back-end system. So for Ice Mobile, they were able to provide an integration layer to that information without those legacy systems changing across their customer base. It also significantly improved those development cycles, roughly halving how long it took to build those applications based on the use of APIs. And the other piece, which was very important as well here, is it actually secured that communication channel. So they're actually sharing information over the internet with their partners, as opposed to having to have dedicated connections independent from the internet. So appropriately securing the sharing of that information. The security piece leads me into my last theme, which is around how you can use security to not only enable the capabilities you share, but appropriately protect or secure them. And this is fundamental to the customer experience that I started this whole presentation on. It's really talking very much to how you can get that balance right between providing convenience to your users, regardless of the channel, but also still ensuring an appropriate level of trust and security. Now, we've done some work locally with a superannuation provider, and we're securing over 1 million of their customers through a variety of channels. And one of their big challenges as they move to providing more capabilities through mobile than web was still maintaining that same level of security and ensuring an appropriate experience. So that was a big differentiator for them, having that consistent security model to back that up. And the other thing is, this allows security to be an enabler which can have a positive impact on revenue. So, we're now entering, I guess, an environment or a world where your identity is the new perimeter. That's where you're focusing. You're not talking around putting up walls to prevent people accessing informational solutions. So, in wrapping up, my, I guess, call to action to all of you would be, you need to ask yourself, how can you accelerate your own digital transformations? How can you progress the journeys that you're already on? It's certainly something we'd be more than happy to talk to you about and help you maybe answer some of those questions. And with that, based on the clock, I'm pretty much finished. So I'm letting you all go for a coffee a little bit earlier than might have been planned, perhaps. Thank you very much.